Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and we're going to be talking about small business and some of the issues that you face doing cybersecurity there. So if that's of interest to you, pay attention. And even if you're working for a big corporation, pay attention anyway, because who knows, your next job might be in a small one, and you'll need to know this stuff. See, on the podcast, we often focus on looking at all the new tools that big companies should consider, given the large number of risks that they face. However, it's important to remember that cyber isn't one size fits all. For example, it'd be crazy to think that a small law office with less than 50 people is going to run 50 different cybersecurity tools. So that begs the question, if it's unreasonable for a small business to run 50 tools, how many should they run? That's a really good question. It brings us to the topic of our show. What does it take to get a small business safe and secure to a reasonable level, and what should be the security baseline for a small organization? Well, first of all, let's define a size for a small business. A small company might be something like a law practice or a title insurance company. It could have 20, 30, 40 people working in a single office. Now, it doesn't have to be a law practice. It could be a dentist's office, a restaurant, even a small consulting business. As long as you've got, let's say, roughly 50 people or less. So given that size of an organization, what should they focus on? Now, we did look at this topic way back on the 30th of January in 2023 on an episode titled One Vendor to Secure Them All. And here we focus on how to use Microsoft as a single vendor to meet the Australian Essential 8. Today, we're not going to limit ourselves to just one vendor. We're also going to create our own top 8 tools for organizations to use, maybe 8 plus 1. And you'll see an overlap of many of the same safeguards because they're really good tools to help secure small businesses. Now, from a hardware perspective, one of the first basic requirements for a small business is to purchase or lease laptops for their employees. Now, if you're running a company of 50 people without any computers, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. The two primary choices are Windows or MacBooks, although Chromebooks are becoming a viable alternative for some. A quick aside, when I bought my first personal computer back in the 1980s, I had to choose between what we called back then an IBM compatible and an Apple Macintosh. IBM came out with the first personal computer. It was model 5150 back in 1981. And because they built it on open architecture, other companies were able to duplicate its capabilities and performance, and that's where we got the term IBM compatible. Anyway, I ended up buying an NEC PC with an 8386 chip running at a blistering 20 megahertz. Shelled out extra for the 8387 math coprocessor, bought 8 megs of RAM, because RAM is $500 per meg. Not gig, meg. Bought a double height 130 meg, not gig, hard drive for an additional $1,500. That thing sounded like an F-14 winding up when it got going. Add a laser printer, and I was in business for around $7,500 or $19,000 in 2024 dollars. That's a lot to get going. But today you can go to Dell.com, select the options you want, or cheap out and use the Dell Outlet Store, then have the PC on your desk within a couple days. And out of the box, it'll have automatic updates turned on. There's 2 primary types of Windows updates, features updates and quality updates. Feature updates typically are released annually and add new functionality. Quality updates include security and non-security updates, as well as critical and even driver updates, and typically come out on Super Patch Tuesday, the second Tuesday of each month. Now, for companies still running Windows 10, don't forget that version 22H2 will reach end of service on the 14th of October, 2025. And not all PCs are upgradable to Windows 11. The biggest missing component is often a Trusted Platform Module, or TPM. So used or older PCs are going to become a potential liability next year when the updates start coming. Also, don't forget that Microsoft product updates need to be applied to Microsoft 365 software tools. They don't get downloaded automatically with operating system updates. See, the average user doesn't think about patching or updating, and given the opportunity, may defer updates indefinitely as a perceived inconvenience. This is an invitation to trouble, and you need to head it off early. So that's one of the first tools to consider for your small enterprise is a patch management solution. And this functionality is often subsumed in endpoint management solutions. The goal here is to ensure that machines receive and install patches with minimal delay. Now, solutions like Microsoft Intune, Automox, and Ninja One are common examples of patch management solutions. Essentially, there's an agent deployed to each endpoint that enforces patching and certain device configurations. These can come up all at once, so you can set up auto-patch rings to space out the downloads. Now, if users don't update the patches willingly, then the administrators can force them remotely. Now, note that these tools are not restricted to Microsoft patching only. Pretty much anything you can install through Intune can be patched through Intune. Well, now that we've patched the endpoints, the next thing we need to do is run a tool that's looking for malware or anything malicious on those endpoints. The term antivirus was popular years ago, but currently our industry uses the term Endpoint Detection and Response, or EDR tools, as the modern-day equivalent. Popular solutions used for small business include, but not limited to, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, CrowdStrike, Falcon Endpoint Protection Platform, SentinelOne, Singularity, Huntress Managed EDR. These tools will also install an agent on the endpoint to protect against malware that tries to run when a user downloads and executes a malicious payload. All right, now we're cooking. We got a patch laptop with an EDR solution. What's next? Well, let's say our users want to connect to the internet. Why not? We need to understand what sites they're going to and if we want to allow that access. The traditional way to do that is use a secure web gateway. Now, secure web gateways have been around for a while. You just might recognize them by different names, such as a web proxy or DNS filter. But these solutions categorize a multiple number of websites into various categories. Some companies may permit employees to visit social media websites during working hours, while others may not. These solutions give IT admins the flexibility to authorize what is and what is not allowed. Generally speaking, companies are going to block porn sites, gambling sites, the darknet, sanctioned countries, and others. And some will even go to the point of blocking AI websites such as ChatGPT, social media, or sports websites via the secure web gateway. And common examples of this type of tool could be OpenDNS or Cisco Umbrella, Semantic Bluecoat, Zscaler, Internet Access. Now, it's probably worth noting that in the show, I'm not recommending any of these particular technologies. I'm just trying to give some common examples of tools that we see small businesses use. And certainly someone will say, well, why did you pick this vendor or the other vendor that I really like? And the answer is, we don't have to have a show where you got to list 30 plus vendors for each product category. But if you are a vendor and you don't hear your name and you want to, give me a call and we'll build a custom sponsored episode so our listeners could explore how security leaders such as themselves can solve the business problems that you address. There you go. Cheap plug for CISO Tradecraft here. Now, going back to secure web gateways, we often see them work in a trivial fashion by just using DNS. If you try to go to a website that's on the block list, you're probably going to be redirected to a website that says, this is blocked. If you really need to access this website, please submit a ticket to get this website on the approved list for the organization. Now, note this comes up frequently for new websites or websites that have uncommon top-level domain names. For example, it was not common to have websites to end in .io recently. Where is .io? All right. It's in the Indian Ocean. It's the British Indian Ocean territories. It's almost 1,000 miles south of the tip of India. It's called the Footprint of Freedom. Ask me how I know. Naval officer, spent time there in Diego Garcia. Okay, in any case, when that first came out, since most people weren't doing business in Diego Garcia, you'd block it. Now, little thing that I tend to do is there's over 1,400 top-level domain names. And how often do you do business with a .hair or a .ninja or a .xxx, things like that? You don't. And so here's a good idea if you're going to use one of these tools. Block all the TLDs, with the exception of com, net, org, gov, mil, int, edu, the big seven, and then maybe .us, .io, and .ai, Ascension Island, that's become popular, maybe UK if you're dealing with them, things like that. But if a new cyber vendor has a website that ends in .security, you might expect to find those same limitations in the secure web gateway. Now, another thing that I found out is that reputation is a big deal, and when they auto-score them, they'll say, hey, this is a new domain, you probably shouldn't go there. Well, when COVID broke out, and all these new government websites and all these websites with COVID information are coming up, guess what? They're all getting blocked because they were new. So there is a little bit of a weakness in that. So one of the tools that I particularly like is a sandbox browser. Now, I use Authenticate, and what it does is allow a user to browse the internet from a virtual machine without worrying about downloading malware. Even an oops, your files are encrypted isn't a problem because this is a remote VM. You just like an Etch-a-Sketch, you just restart the VM and the ransomware goes away. And I find this is helpful when a user encounters a site that's being blocked by the secure web gateway, but considers it a valid business destination. And instead of submitting a request on a blocked website page and waiting for IT to get around to putting that site on the allow list, the Sandbox browser is free of any destination restrictions. Now, that said, you might want to casually mention to your users that you can still pull the log, so it's not a tool to visit porn sites without being detected, but you can go to evil.ru and see how much they want you to pay to buy that website. Now, the folks that request access to a website that isn't outright blocked via a secure web gateway, and they're going there, but we might have another tool that goes a little bit further into looking at all the websites the employees want to visit. And this is where website security software comes into play. Solutions like Cloudflare browser isolation, LayerX browser security platform, Talent Enterprise browser by Palo Alto Networks, these come to mind. Now, most of these solutions install a Chrome web extension or an agent on the endpoint that polices where the browser goes. For example, you might want to know if users are going to a lot of software as a service websites. Some of that may be allowed, some of it may be disallowed, since employees might just be setting up shadow IT. Solution like website security software help you get a hold of what's happening. Remember, it can be really helpful to look at these types of things because bad actors often use websites to exfil data. So if someone is beaconing out data in large volumes to a Chinese or Russian's website, still can flag that in your organization and even stop those outbound data calls. All right, let's recap where we stand now. We've got a secure laptop. We're going to approve sites so we can track. We have to focus on giving site-specific approvals on locking down access control. And this might mean we need to adopt a single sign-on solution, or SSO. For example, let's say your organization uses 15 different websites, one for a CRM tool, one for billing, one for HR, the list goes on and on. You probably use a single email address as a login for all 15 of those sites. Well, why not? You've already assigned your users a corporate email account. Have that user sign in to each website using that same email address through your SSO. You configure it that way, and this is a good thing because if a user leaves your company, you don't have to delete 15 different logons. You just block the SSO. And the single sign-on will no longer authenticate into any of these websites. Now, most single sign-on solutions are rolled into larger category tools called Identity and Access Management, or IAM, those solutions, and things like Microsoft Entra ID, Okta Workforce Identity, Cisco Duo, Google Cloud Identity and Access Management. See, these tools often have modern capabilities such as using conditional access policies that can limit access control. This gives you a lot more security over traditional username and password. You can leverage conditional access controls to enforce that users need to log in with a username, a password, complete an MFA challenge from an IP address in an approved country. Our laptop is fully patched. It's managed by the company. That's pretty cool. It really, really limits a bad actor's ability to log into one of your websites using one of your user accounts, since they probably are going to be unable to satisfy all of those criteria. Now let's continue with our small business security suite. At this point, users have successfully authenticated with a patched machine into a secure website. What else should we focus on? We need to protect our company email via an email security gateway. Remember, phishing is one of the largest types of attacks that succeed because if you can't get through the technology, go after the people. After using a basic Outlook with an E1 or an E3 license, or even Microsoft Business Basic, considering springing extra for that E5 license to get a lot better email security. Now, that said, I have my own issues with Microsoft's ability to function with email security on an E5 license, and I think other people do as well. I'm not going to badmouth them, but I'm saying that if you are wise, you should consider looking at other email gateway solutions such as Proofpoint or Abnormal Security or Mimecast or Darktrace if you didn't want to go with just pure Microsoft. Long story short, you can expect phishing to remain a constant threat in our digital world, so do yourself a favor with safeguards in place to protect your email as much as possible. Starting to feel overwhelmed? You might be. Well, let's look at what's missing. You have a variety of tools to safeguard your assets, but who's looking at all the alerts? Do you really think that a 25-person company has a full-time security person watching 24/7? No, it's not affordable. At best, you got a person maybe dedicated part-time to IT. Now, what's a good way to solve that issue? You probably need to get a managed detection and response, or MDR solution, where the company outsources monitoring security findings to a company that will do the work. And this allows the organization to get like a mini SOC for a fraction of the price of a full-time headcount. Arctic Wolf, Red Canary, Expel, CrowdStrike, Falcon Complete, Rapid7 Managed Detection and Response. These are examples of companies that will specialize in MDR. Now, I work with Red Canary, and I've configured a number of automated rules that provide for actions to take place automatically when their team validates a potential threat, even if I'm in the air at 35,000 feet or it's 2 a.m. It works really well. So let's do a quick recap of our 8 tools, see if we're forgetting anything. First, we deploy patch and endpoint management solutions to manage our workstations. Secondly, we'll use endpoint detection and response tools to stop malware. Third, we'll use a sandbox browser to reach improperly blocked or potentially dangerous websites, or do research in the dark web. Fourth, we leverage secure web gateways to block malicious website URLs. Fifth, we'll have website security software to understand if there's a shadow IT or other websites that shouldn't be allowed for corporate use. Sixth, we'll incorporate an identity and access management or IAM solution to ensure proper single sign-on and access control. Seventh, we'll focus on stopping phishing attacks by deploying an email security gateway. And eighth, we need someone to actively monitor all these tools, so we purchased a managed detection and response service because it's far cheaper than building out our own SOC. Now, once we have these basic 8 safeguards, here's one more bonus to add that makes a lot of sense. We recommend that you get a password manager tool, like a 1Password or Bitwarden or even LastPass. You want every password to be different on every website. See, this is kind of hard to manage, and so what happens is traditionally people write them down or put the same password and then put something different on the end of it for each website. Or worse yet, they stick them in an Excel spreadsheet and store it on their desktop. That's a really, really bad idea because that's one of the first places people can go look at it if you get a machine that gets popped. Also, what you want to consider then is that if employees are going to non-work related sites on laptops, paying online bills, getting something on Amazon, doing travel, the point is that you want them to use unique passwords on every single website. That'll help your organization because you don't want a user using a password that you have for a login at corporate on another site that gets popped, because that just makes the bad guys easier. And they're watering holes attacks where they expect someone said, hey, we just set up a deli around the corner, sign up for a free sandwich. And you say, put in your corporate email address and create a password. And some lazy people create their own password, which they have in the corporate place, win for the bad guy. So what you want to think about then is the best way to do it is to allow Password Manager to select the password, auto-populate it for you. Even Google has it built into Chrome, although there's some concerns about using the Chrome browser for that because all you really need to know is the device password to unlock that entire vault. What's the problem? Well, what if it's your cell phone? It's just a 4-digit PIN. Everything's been exposed as compared to something that's a little bit more complex. So here's what I recommend. Have a big, long passphrase to get into that tool. The little girl went to the store to buy some food for a cat. Don't worry about uppercase, lowercase. Just type it out. It's huge. It's long. And you can type it fairly quickly. Do something you can actually type on your cell phone too, so it's not uppercase, lowercase, number, special characters, because that level of entropy is great, but not for you to get in to get this thing going. Better yet, hook it up to your single sign-on. We've done that. So you can go ahead and use SSO once you're authenticated into Microsoft, because presumably you've got strong authentication there, right? You've got MFA, you've got good validation on a device that is managed by the organization. It is patched, it is current, it is meets all the requirements. Yeah, then you can go ahead and do it that way. So let your people use that. That'll help. So that's our top 8 plus 1 tool for small businesses. There's probably a lot of you are thinking about the tools we might have missed. And if you think there's a more important tool than the ones that we've mentioned for small businesses, let us know. You might be right. Give me an explanation on why you think it's more important than what we listed. Post it to us at CISO Tradecraft or send us an email. You might hear your name on a future show. Now, before I close out the show, I want you to think about how much these 8 tools will stack up against popular cyber best practices. Now, since we're talking about small business, we wouldn't expect them to complete a SOC 2 Type 2 or an ISO 27001 certification. They wouldn't be appropriate or practical or affordable. So what would be appropriate is for a small business to follow the 18 Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls Implementation Group 1. That's a mouthful, CIS Controls. But let's take a look and see how we do. Now, CIS Controls 1 and 2 tell us to establish and maintain detailed enterprise inventory and address unauthorized assets. And we can use our endpoint management systems to manage our devices. We can also use our identity and access management systems to prevent unauthorized devices. So that's pretty good. So 2 for 2 on the controls. Now, control number 3 tells us to develop processes and technical controls to identify, classify, securely handle, retain, and dispose of data. Haven't done much to perform data protection, so we get no credit there. So we're 2 out of 3, but let's keep rolling. CIS Control 4 tells us to establish and maintain the secure configuration of enterprise assets and software. Now, since we're using endpoint management systems and website security software, we're accomplishing these goals, so we're 3 out of 4. CIS Control 5 tells us to use processes and tools to assign and manage authorization to credentials for user accounts, including administrator accounts, as well as service accounts, to enterprise assets and software. Now, if we're using an identity and access management solution effectively with the password manager, then we would have unique passwords We disable dormant accounts, restrict privileges to authorized individuals, and maintain an effective inventory of identities. I think that meets our control. So we're now 4 out of 5. CIS Control 6 tells us to use processes and tools to create, assign, manage, and revoke access credentials and privileges for the user, administrator, and service accounts for enterprise assets and software. Now, that's quite similar to Control 5, so we can count that one as well, since we have an access granting process, an access revoking process, and we do require MFA for all these applications. So we're 5 out of 6. Okay, we're on a roll here. Control 7 tells us to perform vulnerability management through establishing and maintaining a remediation process and performing automated OS patch management. Ta-da! We have a patch and endpoint management solution to do just that. And we can use our IAM solution to enforce patching before sign-on. So now we're at 6 out of 7. CIS Control 8 tells us to collect, alert, review, and retain audit logs of events that could help detect, understand, or recover from an attack. And not only are we collecting logs from various tools, we're sending them to our MDR provider. We are actively monitoring them, which is exactly where we want to be. Now we're 7 out of 8. CIS Control 9 tells us to improve protections and detections of threats from email and web vectors, as these are opportunities for attackers to manipulate human behavior through direct engagement. Here, our email secure gateway checks all the right boxes. We also have a secure web gateway and website security software to block malicious URLs, as well as our sandbox browser that lets us walk through the online valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. So far, so good. We're at 8 out of 9. CIS Control 10 tells us to prevent or control the installation, spread, and execution of malicious applications, code, or scripts on enterprise assets. And here, our endpoint detection and response tool does exactly that. We're at 9 out of 10. CIS Control 11 tells us to establish and maintain data recovery practices sufficient to restore in-scope enterprise assets to a pre-incident and trusted state. This is usually done through backups and disaster recovery tests. And with our basic setup that we set up, I'm not sure we'll meet this control. Now, technically, we could meet it with Microsoft OneDrive if we configure it correctly, because it's actually created, if you look at it in the Windows options, under ransomware protection. So it may already be being performed, but I'm not going to take credit for that because I really didn't add that to our list. So we'll take 9 out of 11. Still not bad. Control 12 tells us to establish, implement, and actively manage by tracking, reporting, and correcting network devices in order to prevent attackers from exploiting vulnerable network services and access points. Now, this is where the CIS controls are showing their age a little bit, because if the end-to-end path is encrypted via TLS or you use VPN, it really doesn't matter as much what network devices you run on, does it? In a small office, a Wi-Fi mesh network typically requires minimal setup and maintenance. If your router auto-updates and doesn't use default passwords, which is common in newer devices, you're all set. I'll take credit for that one, but 10 out of 12. Control 13 tells us to operate processes and tooling to establish and maintain comprehensive network monitoring and defense against security threats across the enterprise's network infrastructure and user base. Well, having secure web gateways and website security software meets this requirement. We're now at 11 out of 13. Control 14 tells us to perform security awareness and skills training. Control 15 tells us to manage our service provider or perform third-party risk management. Since neither of these items focus on cyber tools, we're going to give ourselves a 0 on both of these. So we're still at 11 out of 15 now. But Control 16 tells us to perform application software security, which is largely NA, since we're just buying commercial SaaS software, not developing it. So we'll give ourselves a little bit of liberty here and say we meet the intent of the control. So 12 out of 16. Control 17 tells us to perform incident management. Since we have a managed MDR provider, we can say that is being effectively handled in the MDR follows their policies. So we're now at 13 out of 17 on the CIS controls. And Control 18 tells us to perform penetration tests, which we don't do. So that leaves us with 13 out of the 18 being met by just 8 cybersecurity tools for small businesses. And we think this is pretty impressive and should be the bare minimum for organizations that truly care about cybersecurity, particularly those with a limited budget. You can do more with more money, you can do more with more people, but what you think you want to do then is look at good backups as the next thing to focus on. Certainly there's more to do, and cyber is a journey. So, I hope you enjoyed today's show. We went through the basics of securing a small business. If you learned something, share it with others. If you disagree with us, it's okay. Tell us what you think we're missing. Give us a call. Contact us on LinkedIn or post something on YouTube. We'd love to learn the Tradecraft from our listeners, see what you're doing. Most of your amazing CISOs have excellent experiences. They're going to be a little bit different from us. Mine's aren't better than yours. It's different than yours. But this is what makes the cyber community so much fun. So thanks again for spending time with us at CISO Tradecraft. We hope you found this episode valuable. I'm your host, G. Mark Hardy. And until next time, stay safe out there.